This is Mr. Eugene, and today we're discussing something that transformed my relationships completely: how to never fight with a woman. And I don't mean reduce conflict or fight less often. I mean never. It's been years since I had an actual fight with a woman, and I intend to keep it that way. Because once you understand the mechanics of why fights happen and how to prevent them, you realize fighting with a woman is completely pointless. You cannot win. When you lose, you lose. When you win, you still lose. The only winning move is not to play. And let me be clear, this isn't about becoming a doormat. This isn't about accepting disrespect or avoiding difficult conversations. This is about understanding that most fights with women aren't actually about the stated issue. They're about emotional dynamics you're unconsciously triggering. And once you learn to manage those dynamics deliberately, conflict simply disappears. And before we get into this, let me tell you why this matters to me and why I'm willing to share what took me years to figure out. Because I spent decades fighting with women, arguing about things that didn't matter, defending positions I didn't care about, trying to win conflicts where winning just meant losing differently. And every fight was exhausting, pointless, and completely avoidable. I thought the problem was the women I was choosing, and partially it was. But mostly, the problem was me, the way I was communicating, the way I was expressing emotion unconsciously, the way I was triggering her emotional escalation without realizing I was doing it. Once I learned to communicate differently, once I learned to remove every trace of negative emotion from my tone while maintaining warmth and presence, fighting stopped, completely. Not because I found magically perfect women, but because I stopped doing the things that provoke fights in the first place. And my life became so much more peaceful, so much more loving, so much more enjoyable, that I can't imagine going back to the old pattern. So if you're here expecting me to teach you how to win arguments with women, or how to prove you're right when she's being irrational, you're in the wrong place. This is about transcending conflict entirely by managing the emotional dynamics that create it. Stay with me. Today we're examining why fighting with women is pointless, how men unconsciously provoke conflict, and the specific communication framework that eliminates fighting entirely. Why fighting with women is pointless. Let's start with fundamental reality. You cannot win a fight with a woman. The structure of the conflict guarantees your loss regardless of outcome. If she wins the argument, if you concede, if you apologize, if you accept her frame, you lose, obviously. You've been dominated. You've sacrificed your position. You've accepted blame for things that aren't your fault. Clear loss. But if you win the argument, if you prove her wrong with logic, if you demonstrate that her position is irrational, if you force her to concede through superior reasoning, you still lose. Why? Because you've made her feel stupid, defeated, dominated. You've triggered her insecurity and resentment, and she'll punish you for that victory in ways that make the win cost far more than it was worth. So win or lose, you lose. The only way to win is not to fight at all. This is ancient wisdom. Sun Tzu said it thousands of years ago: the greatest victory is that which requires no battle. If you're fighting, you've already failed. True mastery is structuring situations so fighting never becomes necessary. And I'm here to tell you, it's possible. It's not just theoretical philosophy, it's practical reality I've lived for years. And once you understand the mechanics, you'll wonder why you wasted so many years fighting about things that never mattered. Selection, 90% of success. First principle: you cannot have conflict-free relationship with conflict-prone woman. No amount of communication skill prevents fights with woman who's addicted to drama, unable to regulate emotions, or fundamentally disagreeable. This is where most men fail immediately. They choose poorly. They commit to women who are obviously high conflict, then spend years trying to manage the unmanageable. If you're dating a woman who's provocative, who picks fights regularly, who escalates minor issues into drama consistently, stop. Just stop. Don't try to fix her. Don't convince yourself she'll change. Don't rationalize that the relationship has other benefits that offset the constant conflict. Just walk away. The good news, these women tell on themselves early. They're easy to identify during courtship if you're paying attention. If she's difficult, argumentative, or dramatic during the best behavior phase of early dating, imagine what she'll be like once comfortable. Treat dating like hiring process. If candidate was difficult and argumentative in first interview, would you hire them? No. You'd wish them well with their search and move on to better candidates. Do the same with women. This requires optionality. You need to be in position where walking away from bad candidate doesn't feel like you're losing your only option. If you're desperate, if you're thinking with the wrong head because she's physically attractive and you're not getting options elsewhere, you'll tolerate behavior you shouldn't tolerate. You'll rationalize red flags. You'll commit to someone you should have screened out. Cultivate options. Date multiple women simultaneously until one proves herself worthy of exclusivity. Don't become emotionally entangled until you've determined she's someone with whom you can have peaceful relationship. So, step 1. Choose wisely. Screen ruthlessly. Walk away from conflict-prone women immediately. This eliminates 90% of potential fighting before it starts. Your role, how men provoke fights unconsciously, but let's assume you've chosen well. You're with reasonable, emotionally stable woman. Does this mean zero conflict? Not necessarily, because here's what most men don't realize. You might be provoking fights unconsciously through how you communicate. Just like women can be disrespectful without realizing it, just like they express contempt through tone and facial expressions unconsciously, men can be antagonistic without realizing it. We express annoyance, judgment, irritation, contempt through tone of voice without consciously intending to. And those tiny traces of negative emotion trigger her emotional escalation. Here's the principle most men don't understand. Women magnify and reflect emotional energy. Think about pregnancy metaphor. You give her one microscopic sperm. 9 months later, she gives you back entire human being. She took tiny input and magnified it exponentially. That's feminine nature, magnify and reflect. Apply this to communication, give her tiny hint of irritation in your tone. She magnifies that into aggravation and reflects it back. You respond with aggravation, she magnifies that into exasperation and fury and reflects that back. Before you know it, you're in full-blown fight over something that started with barely perceptible irritation in your voice. Think about moon and sun metaphor. In virtually every culture, moon is feminine, sun is masculine. Why is moon bright? Reflected sunlight. Quality of moonlight is almost entirely determined by quality of sunlight. You're the sun. Your emotional energy is the light you're giving her. She's the moon. She reflects that light back at you, magnified. If you emit warm, positive emotional energy, she reflects warm, positive emotional energy back. If you emit cold, negative, judgmental emotional energy, she reflects that back, amplified. Understanding this changes everything, because most fights with women can be traced back to some tiny trace of negative emotion in your tone that she magnified and reflected. You think you were being neutral or reasonable, she experienced you as angry or contemptuous, and she responded to what she experienced, not what you consciously intended. The solution: clarify your tone. So here's what you need to do. Remove every hint of annoyance, aggravation, judgment, contempt, or negative emotion from your communication with women. Not just the obvious expressions, every trace, every hint, every subtle undertone. This is difficult. It requires perpetual mindfulness, mindful of your words, mindful of your tone, mindful of your facial expressions, and ultimately mindful of your thoughts, because thoughts generate emotions, which generate tone, which generates her response. When you practice this, you'll discover something uncomfortable. You're expressing negativity, especially judgment, far more often than you realized. You're doing it unconsciously, unintentionally, but you're doing it, and she's responding to it even when you're not aware you're doing it. Now, before you object, before you say, "Why should I have to police every micro-expression? Why does she get to be hypersensitive while I have to be perfectly controlled?" Let me respond pragmatically: because it works. And the alternative doesn't. You can spend years trying to convince women that their emotional responses are disproportionate to tiny traces of negativity in your tone. Good luck with that. I tried for decades. It doesn't work. Or you can accept that women magnify and reflect emotional energy and learn to emit only the emotional energy you want reflected back, amplified. This actually works. Immediately. Consistently. I'm not saying it's fair. I'm saying it's effective. And I'd rather be effective than right. What this actually means in practice. So does this mean you can never disagree with woman? Never correct her when she's wrong? Never establish boundaries when she's out of line? Absolutely not. But it means you need to find ways to disagree, correct, or check her behavior without expressing irritation, contempt, or negative judgment. Here's an example. She says something factually wrong. You could respond, "Actually, that's not right. The real situation is correct information. That's technically accurate. But hear the tone? Hear the subtle condescension? Actually, that's not right." She hears, "You're wrong and I'm correcting you." Alternative? Interesting. I heard it was correct information. Maybe I'm wrong. Same content. Zero condescension. She doesn't feel attacked. She doesn't need to defend her position because you haven't made it conflict. She can accept correction without losing face. Here's another. She's being disrespectful. You could respond, "Don't talk to me like that." Factually reasonable boundary. But hear the tone? Hear the anger underneath? She hears, "I'm angry and you need to change your behavior." Alternative, "Hey babe, I'm on your team here. Let's try that again." Same boundary. Zero anger. You're maintaining frame. You're not accepting disrespect, but you're doing it with warmth. She can self-correct without escalating into defensive conflict. The key isn't content. It's tone. You can say almost anything if your tone is warm and you have twinkle in your eye. She'll listen. She'll respond constructively. She might even laugh with you at whatever ridiculousness she was on about. But if your tone contains any trace of judgment, condescension, irritation, anger, she'll react to that emotion, not to your words. And you'll be off to the races in conflict you never consciously chose. The opposite error, removing all emotion. Now here's where it gets interesting. Some men overcorrect. They hear remove negative emotion from your tone, and they remove all emotion. They go completely flat, monotone, cold, rational. And this provokes fights too. Why? Because removing all emotion is actually terrifying to women. When you go completely flat, when you speak in cold, rational, emotionless tone, she can't feel you. She can't sense your emotional investment. It triggers her insecurity. Does he still care? Is the relationship threatened? Is he pulling away? And that insecurity makes her escalate in counterproductive attempt to get emotional response from you that reassures her you're still invested. Men make this mistake because we're applying male social dynamics to female interaction. When men have conflict with other men and we're trying to de-escalate, we remove emotion from our voices. We talk calm and slow. We're going to resolve this rationally. Taking emotion out signals we're not escalating to violence. But women pay far more attention to tone than men do. When you remove all emotion, she doesn't hear calm rationality. She hears emotional withdrawal, coldness, distance, threat to connection, and that provokes her anxiety. So the goal is not to remove all emotion. It's to remove negative emotion while maintaining warm, positive emotional energy. You want undifferentiated warmth, playfulness, presence, connection. Listen to how I'm speaking right now. I'm not monotone, I'm not flat, I'm emotionally present and engaged, but I'm not expressing irritation, judgment, condescension, anger. I'm warm, grounded, present. That's the tone you want with women. Warm presence without negative emotion. If you have that, if you have warmth in your voice and twinkle in your eye, you can say almost anything and she'll be receptive instead of reactive. The practical implementation. So how do you actually implement this? Here's the process. Step 1. Awareness. Start noticing your tone. Record yourself speaking. Listen back. You'll be shocked at how much subtle negativity you're expressing unconsciously. Irritation, impatience, judgment, condescension. It's there. You just haven't been listening for it. Step 2. Pause before responding when she says something that triggers irritation or disagreement. Pause. Don't respond immediately. Take a breath. Check your internal state. Am I feeling negative emotion right now? If yes, that emotion will leak into my tone. So shift internal state before speaking. Step 3. Choose your response. Once you've shifted to neutral or positive internal state, craft your response deliberately. How can I communicate this without any trace of negativity? How can I disagree, correct, establish boundary while maintaining warmth? Step 4. Monitor her response. If she escalates, you failed somewhere. You let negative emotion leak through. Don't defend your intent. Your intent doesn't matter. Her experience matters. She experienced negativity. Take responsibility. You're right. My tone was off. Let me try again. Step 5. Practice consistently. This becomes automatic with practice. Eventually, maintaining warm tone while handling difficult topics becomes your default. You don't have to think about it. You just do it naturally. The results. Once you master this, fighting simply stops because you're no longer triggering the emotional escalation that creates fights. She might still get upset occasionally, but she won't escalate into conflict with you because you're not giving her negativity to magnify and reflect. You're maintaining warm, grounded presence regardless of what's happening. And that warmth prevents escalation. You can handle difficult conversations, you can disagree, you can establish boundaries. You can correct behavior. But none of it becomes fighting because you're managing the emotional dynamics that transform disagreement into conflict. My life has been so much more peaceful since I figured this out. Relationships that used to involve constant low-level conflict became completely peaceful. Not because the women changed, because I stopped unconsciously provoking fights through negative emotional energy in my tone. The limits. Now let me be clear, this works with reasonable women who are fundamentally emotionally stable and not addicted to drama. If you're with highly conflict-prone woman, if she picks fights regardless of your tone, if she's looking for conflict to generate emotional intensity, this won't work because she needs conflict. She's addicted to the emotional volatility, and no amount of communication skill prevents that. That's why selection is 90% of the solution. Choose well, and communication refinement creates conflict-free relationship. Choose poorly, and even perfect communication won't prevent constant drama. But if you've chosen well, if you're with fundamentally reasonable woman, managing your tone eliminates virtually all conflict. The remaining disagreements get handled calmly, constructively, without escalation into fighting. Final thoughts. Let me tell you why I'm sharing this despite knowing some men will resist it as unfair or too much work. Because it works, and because fighting is exhausting and pointless and completely avoidable once you understand the mechanics. I spent years fighting with women, defending positions I didn't care about, trying to win arguments that couldn't be won, believing the problem was them. their irrationality, their emotionality, their tendency to escalate minor issues. And partially the problem was them. I was choosing poorly and tolerating behavior I shouldn't have tolerated, but mostly the problem was me. I was unconsciously provoking fights through negative emotional energy in my tone. I was triggering her magnify and reflect response by giving her negativity to amplify. And I was blaming her for responding to emotional energy I was emitting unconsciously. Once I took responsibility for my side, once I learned to communicate without any trace of negative emotion while maintaining warmth and presence, fighting stopped completely, and my relationships became dramatically more peaceful and enjoyable. This channel exists because I got tired of watching men suffer through preventable conflict. I got tired of men blaming women for being emotional while unconsciously triggering that emotionality through poor communication. I got tired of watching men fight battles they can't win when they could simply avoid the battles entirely. So if this resonated, if you recognize yourself in these patterns, make the changes. Start monitoring your tone. Remove every trace of negativity. Maintain warmth while handling difficult topics. Master this skill. Drop a comment about your experience. Do you recognize how your tone might be triggering conflict? Have you noticed patterns where tiny irritation in your voice escalates into full fights? Share so other men learn. Subscribe for more truth about relationship dynamics that most men never figure out. Because this channel will never tell you to win fights with women through superior logic. We'll never encourage you to prove her wrong at cost of relationship peace. We'll never frame conflict as inevitable instead of completely avoidable through better communication. The only winning move is not to play. Master your tone and you'll never have to fight again.